The Pacer Pro is a new watch from Polar, and it seems to do everything that Polar's high-end watches do, but it does it for a fraction of the price. So, what's the catch? It's time to put on the Pacer Pro and take it for a ride. Yo, what's going on everybody? My name is Kofuzi and today I'm going to be talking about the Polar Pacer Pro from a runner's perspective. Before I give you my thoughts on this watch and how it is the same or different than the Vantage V2, I do want to go over a couple of kind of caveats and also a disclosure. In terms of caveats, I'm going to say that these watches each have a laundry list of features in terms of technical specifications and also things that they can do. I'm not going to go over all of those here. So today I'm going to focus and really hone in on the things that I actually use on a daily basis in my training as a road runner. And in terms of disclosures, I do want to say that all the Polar watches that I'm going to be discussing today were provided by Polar for the purpose of review. However, they're not paying me to make this video or to use any of these watches, and they're not going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure and that caveat out of the way, let's talk about the Polar Pacer Pro versus the Polar Vantage V2. First, let's go over the specs in the Pacer Pro. Let's talk about what's inside. Some of the new stuff that we have in this watch is that it is Corning Glass 3.0, and this year they've moved the actual internals of the watch closer to the screen, which is going to help make it that much easier to read in direct sunlight. Also, there's a memory in pixel display, which is again going to help make this screen readable even in direct sunlight, while also saving on some battery life. And in terms of battery life, you're going to get up to 35 hours of continuous GPS and heart rate tracking in terms of a single activity. So for most of you ultra runners out there, this watch is going to be able to handle your longest of races in terms of real world use. Polar says that it can handle 7 days of activity without a charge. I've been getting something closer to about 4 or 5 days before I feel like I'm starting to get nervous about not having enough battery for my next run. Maybe I could stretch it out to 7 days, but kind of in terms of my real world usage, after about every 4 or 5 days or so, I feel the need to put it on the charger. And again, like most of the Polar watches that I've ever used, if I put it on the charger while I'm taking a shower, that's usually enough to keep me topped up. Going to the inside of the watch, there is a lot of change here. There's a difference in the heart rate monitor mechanism. Polar watches used to always have this giant kind of bump out in order to better get contact with the skin for the wrist-based heart rate monitoring. That big bump out is gone, and they've also tweaked the algorithm to help make it to be an even more accurate wrist-based heart rate monitoring system. It also makes the watch just a lot easier to wear. With the change up on the back of the watch, they've also changed the charging mechanism, which is a little bit of a disappointment to me whenever a watch company changes the way the watches charge, because that means then you got to go out and get all new cables. It does come with one cable in the box, and I do find that although they say it's supposed to charge faster, and I do think that it does charge faster with the new mechanism, it seems to be really easy to dislodge. So you got to be extra careful when you're kind of setting the watch back down after you've kind of placed the charging thing on the back, because it's magnetic. So just something to keep in mind there. In terms of the display size, we got a 1.2 inch display with a 240 by 240 resolution. It is inside a plastic case, which is not going to feel as premium on the wrist, but it is going to help with weight quite a bit. And there is aluminum here, but is in the bezel. In terms of bands, the band that it comes with is a very comfortable band, and I do have this one in like the charcoal gray color. I do really enjoy the color. They also had sent me the white one, and this is what they had originally sent. I think this white one, the little splash of color on the inside, is a really fantastic color. I absolutely love it. But the white one that they sent me was a pre-production unit that did end up having some issues, so I've been doing all my testing on this charcoal gray unit. But one of the things you can do is switch out the bands really easily. There's kind of a quick change system, and there's an adapter as well. So if you don't like any of the polar bands, you can switch it out to pretty much any band that you want, any like standard kind of watch sized band. It has multiple types of GPS radio, so you're going to be getting a good GPS signal with this watch. There's a barometric altimeter, there's a magnetometer, which is going to help you with the mapping and give you those compass directions. There's an accelerometer, and it has connectivity with Bluetooth 5.1. Altogether, this watch comes in at a thin and lightweight of 41 grams. All right, now let's talk about, with all those components in terms of what's inside, what can this watch do? So for me as a runner, this watch does pretty much everything I need to do. All the basics it takes care of. It can give me pace, distance, and my heart rate. For me personally, it's no knock on the new motion rejection algorithm to Polar, but I still need a external heart rate monitor. I did take this for a run without an external heart rate monitor when I was in New York last weekend. I also tested out some of the mapping features on that. And in terms of the mapping, it all kind of works as well as the mapping has worked in previous times in other Polar watches that I've tested, which means for the most part, for most of you, it's going to be really great. You can load up a course beforehand, get it synced up to the watch, and use it to give you kind of the breadcrumb navigation. It lets you know when the turns are coming, how much further you have, and if you've gone off course, it lets you know that as well. But you know, for someone that's as good at getting lost as I am, it wasn't able to completely save me from myself on this particular run that I took from Central Park in New York over to my parents' house in New Jersey. It was about an 11-mile run. There was one part as I was leaving Central Park where I kind of took the wrong way somehow, and then I got all sorts of spun around. And so I feel like sometimes the directions on the map are a little bit laggy. Like sometimes it's not always consistent in terms of pace, in terms of as I'm approaching an intersection, in terms of where I might need to turn. Sometimes I feel like I need to turn earlier than it looks like I need to turn on the watch. Other times I feel like I have more time, and then already the next time I look at the watch, I've already missed the turn. So there's always something that happens in areas where there's a lot of potential places to go. That's kind of something that always still happens to me. And I don't know of any watch that is able to defeat me, basically. And in terms of the heart rate, I took a look at the tracing, and it was a very hot day that day. Temperatures were in the 90s, which was very unusual for May. And it was the first time I'd run in that kind of heat in a very, very long time. So it was not something I was really accustomed to. Probably also a little bit short on the amount of water that I brought along with me for the day, which was none. Fortunately, there were water fountains that were available along the route. But, you know, the heart rate at certain points were just way too high to be accurate. So I don't know what it is. It's skin tone, arm shape, whatever. I still have problems with wrist-based heart rate, and that kind of continues. The other thing that this watch can do is provide you power from the wrist, which means that even without a foot pod, you can know how hard you're working. I do use an external foot pod. I have been using one for years. I've been using the Stride foot pod on pretty much every single run that I've ever been on since I bought the thing. And there's full compatibility with the Polar Pacer Pro. In terms of looking at the data during the run, you can customize the data fields any way that you want. So you could look at, like, you know, your current pace, total elapsed time, or the lap duration, your power, your heart rate numbers, all that kind of thing. And if you're training in specific ranges, like if you're doing low heart rate training and you're trying to keep your run easy, there's a zone lock feature that is super easy to use on this watch, and you can toggle it on and off really easily. And you can set those zone locks for heart rate or for your pace or for your power numbers as well. So there's a lot of flexibility in setting up this watch to do exactly what you need to do for your training. And if you have workouts that you want to do, you can run that all through the watch as well. Polar has really made a lot of strides on the software side of it in terms of getting those structured workouts set up. And so you could set up like a long warm up and then have repeating work and rest phases. So if you're doing like a threshold workout where you have like a certain number of minutes where you can be running at a faster pace and then recovering for a short amount of time and then repeating that cycle over and over again, that's something that could all be driven through the watch. And so like you don't have to worry about like checking to make sure, have I recovered too long, or is this rep still going? The watch will just kind of buzz and beep at you and let you know when you're supposed to start running hard and when you can stop running so hard and get a chance to catch your breath. Now there's widgets also on the watch faces as well that you can cycle through, and some of them are more helpful than others. The main ones that I really look at are the weather widget, because then it gives me a sense of like, is rain coming or not? And then also like the sleep tracking. Using the widgets is the main way that I kind of keep track of how well my body is recovering through the metrics that this watch tracks for me during my sleep. And that's one of the main things that I love about Polar watches that I just don't think that other brands quite have been able to match yet. I think the closest might be Whoop, but that's kind of a different device and it's not a GPS running watch. But in terms of the sleep metrics, it lets you know things like your respiration rate while you're sleeping, your heart rate, beat to beat interval, your heart rate variability, and your average heart rate throughout the night. And then it also compares that to your baseline, which is the average over the last 28 days. So I feel like it gives you a really good sense of like how stressed is your body even at that resting phase, and lets you know, I think really well, some of the workouts that you've been putting yourself through are still like exacting a toll on your body, and maybe the next day when you wake up, it gives you some insight as to whether or not you might need another easy day before you hit that next hard workout. And in terms of other activities besides running, you can definitely take it on the bike. I've used it for several bike rides now, and it also has like lap swimming, open water swimming type of functionality. So if you are multi-sport doing that run, bike, swim, this is a watch that you can certainly use as well. Now with some of the what's inside and what can it do with that what's inside out of the way, now let's start talking about the comparison in terms of comparing these two watches and what it was like to run with the Pacer Pro. I gotta tell you, in terms of everything that I ever need to do with my running watch, the Pacer Pro does it. Which is to say that everything the Polar Vantage V2 does, the Polar Pacer Pro also seems to do. I really can't think of a single thing that I went to go look at my watch and was going to do and was like, oh, this is a different watch and it doesn't have that function or doesn't have that feature. That didn't come up in any of my testing of this watch, and I've had this watch for probably about over a month now. And so like I'm having a hard time really understanding kind of where Polar is going to be going with the Vantage V2. I mean, I don't know if there's going to be a Vantage V3, but if there is going to be a Vantage V3, I've struggled to kind of figure out like, well, if everything's already in the Polar Pacer Pro and this watch is $300, what do you do with the Vantage V2, which last year was a $500 watch? So I'm not really sure where they're going to go with it, but I'm not going to question it either, because I think getting everything that the Polar Vantage V2 had in the Pacer Pro package, I think is a really good deal. The only thing that I think that you're kind of missing out is the weird thing about like watches, and the very unique thing about watches. There's like a strange little niche carved out in watches for like premiumness and luxury, even for sport watches. And so like the Vantage V2 certainly does feel like a nicer watch. I think it has better materials in it. It's a little bit heavier, which in a performance aspect is kind of a negative, but from like a having something nice on the wrist, it just kind of feels nice, you know, not when I'm running, but like all the other hours that I'm wearing it. There is like a more premium feel to the Vantage V2. And if there is a Vantage V3, I'm not sure if there is or not, but if there is, I could see it becoming more of like, these are more premium everything in terms of build and materials and what's going to really go into it. But in terms of like base functionality, the Polar Pacer Pro seems to have it all. And that's a fantastic thing. This watch is definitely going to become my new daily driver. If you have any other questions about the Pacer Pro or the Vantage V2 or any other Polar watches in the lineup, feel free to put them in the comments down below, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do Monday through Friday right here on YouTube. I'd love to talk to you guys in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?